I'm the one you've been talking about. Guess I'm the one you've been talking about. Unpopular, coming out classed out, simple truth.
Hey guys, Dozer here. Been a while, but I thought I'd chime in with a new set release from Rosetta just a couple weeks ago. It's been a really fun experience to get involved in pre-release, release weekend, draft days with the boys, and a lot of deck building and discussions as new people come into the game and people get reignited on their passions with the game. I know that MST's been quiet on the channel, but I've been going through a lot of stuff on my end, and I've just had a lot of things keep me busy, so I'm happy to be coming back to make videos for you guys to get involved in the conversation in the Flesh and Blood community. One thing that's been going around a lot recently has been a specific type of card, which is life gain. There's been obviously some life gain mechanics printed in the set for the Earth heroes like Florian and Verdance, but one card in particular has caught a lot of people's ire, and that's Count Your Blessings. I wanted to do a bit of a talk about that card today, and maybe flesh out why I think this is a very exciting set, and I feel like a lot of doom and gloom and gut reactions that I've been hearing have been a bit overblown in my opinion, so let's get right into that. So right off the bat, Count Your Blessings is an instant card. It's a generic, so any deck can run it. It's a red 2-cost card, which lets you gain X life, where X is 3 plus the number of Count Your Blessings in the graveyard for the red, 2 plus X, and then 1 plus X for the blue, and so on. So what's the deal with this card? Well, a lot of people have been complaining about the fact that Count Your Blessings decks are basically fatigue, right? Where they're making a lot of life total stuff and they're becoming very hard to rush down or kill, or as they say, mid-range down, where you block a little, attack a little. And these decks that bank a lot of HP and then eventually use an efficient weapon to close out the game, maybe like a Teklevossen or something like that, is toxic or bad design or not fun or not what Flesh and Blood's all about. And they're complaining a lot about other stuff too, but let's just start with Count Your Blessings on the face. So what's the math behind Count Your Blessings? Well, when you're talking about a play that requires 2 cards, which is Count Your Blessing plus some pitch, so 2 pitch generally is more than a tunic or something can provide for you, so you're going to have to pony up an extra card to activate that card. It's 2 cards for 3 value on the first cast, 4 for the next as a red, and so on. And when you actually do the math and you break it out, I'll try and put a graphic up on the screen of the calculation, but basically you would have gotten the same amount of life by just blocking with those 2 cards if they were 3 blocks. And I don't think anybody's ever been complaining about, oh no, Dorinthia is broken because she can block 3 on all of her cards. I don't really buy that. And so yes, there is a difference where banking life is sometimes better than attacking into an opponent, right? So for instance, if I'm playing a defensive deck, my opponent is going to run out of gas because they're really trying to throw as many cards at their opponent without necessarily thinking about the long game, then yes, those defensive decks are probably better off banking defensive value rather than trying to attack their opponent. Let me give you an example. So if my opponent is attacking me with 0 for 4, 0 for 4, 0 for 4, 0 for 4 every turn, and I'm trying to block, is it better for me to throw a 4 damage hammer swing, or is it better for me to block 3? Now, the math of Flesh and Blood that people love to talk about would imply that you should get the maximum point value out of your hand every single turn. So in the case of maybe playing Bravo or something, you would want to block with 3 cards and pitch your third one to swing your Anathos for 4, or your Titan's Fist, whatever you're using. The thing is, though, is that you're going to take 10 turns to threaten lethal on your opponent if they have no armor with that strategy, while your opponent is pelting your hero with 12 damage per turn that you're blocking 9 of, right? So let's say you're stopping 9 of that damage, you're still taking that, it means 4 damage for every card out of their hand is a little unreasonable, so let's just say it's head jabs. Let's say you're taking 3 damage every turn, and then you're throwing your Anathos back. In that case, you would win the race, right? If you were just taking 3 damage every turn, you would be taking less damage than your opponent every turn, and you would be getting them on the clock faster, and then you'd be able to kill them. However, aggro decks in this game are a bit better than only head jabs. They actually are incentivized to attack because the math of the game is such that a lot of cards actually are better at attacking than defending, and most cards are better at attacking than defending. 0 for 4s, 2 cards, 6s/7s, where you have like a 7 power with a 3 cost on it, etc. These are advantageous trades where even if you're going card for card, generally speaking, that extra damage is going to help you get over the top and kill your opponent. because it's better to win by attacking than it is by blocking, right? That's just kind of an inherent thing in games. You want to be proactive rather than reactive as a default metric of playing the game. So how does Counter Blessings stack up to this? Well, like we can see here, you don't actually net more value out of your deck than with life gain than if you just block with those cards. The caveat to that is that if you had blocked with one card and then pitched a card to activate Counter Blessings, yes, you would technically have some more cards in your deck to block with, so you can technically block a bit longer. But in the case where you have the 0-4, 0-4, 0-4 as you're trying to block, if you're not going to outrace your opponent with damage, you're probably better off actually blocking. So if my opponent's attacking me, for instance, with 4-4-4-4 every turn, and I have the ability to do 3 block, 3 block, 3 block into a hammer swing, yes, that's the optimal math in the sense of, oh, I'm getting the biggest number. But if my opponent is doing 4 chip damage to me every turn, or they're dealing, 7 chip damage to me every turn, right? Then that's a big difference. That's a really big difference. You are going to die in, 6 turns with no armor when you're attacking with 1 card back, versus if you're taking 4 chip damage every turn with no armor, you're going 10 turns. So you're getting 3 extra turns out of your opponent's deck by blocking with that 4th card, and that's just a 3 block. That's not counting sync blows, that's not counting armor, that's not counting anything like that. So can your opponent throw 40 cards at you without running out of damage in their deck? That's not really likely. They might be able to do some stuff like that, and you might be running low on cards too because you're blocking with 4 cards every hand. But because you should be able to weather the storm generally, that's why fatigue has always been kind of like not the most reliable strategy. Decks like Oldhim were able to fatigue more because they were able to not run out of cards in their deck, right? Oldhim could Earth React, he could use his Rampart to block every turn and use Crown of Seeds. So as long as Oldhim had, 2-ish cards left in his deck, he could always Arsenal 1, pitch, and then stop 4 damage every turn forever. And then if you had a card, you could still throw 4 damage at your opponent with the hammer. So Oldhim was really good at fatigue because of stuff like that. In a similar fashion, you might have decks like Verdance or something where you might not necessarily be fatiguing them, but they might be trying to combo you with some big setup play where you are attacking them, and eventually if they get room to set up, they can kill you on the crackback. So my point of saying all this is that Counter Blessings does not inherently enable something that was not already possible. We were already able to run Healing Balm, Sigil of Solace, and Sunkiss, and no one did. And those cards are worth about the same as Counter Blessings as far as healing value when you look at how many cards it took you to actually play them out. Now, obviously, getting a bulk heal all at one is a very different feeling, especially if your opponent's being a very slow deck, and instead of attacking them, you were able to heal, right? You're getting perfectly efficient trading out of that, whereas your opponent, if they were taking damage slower than you were, you hitting their face doesn't really do anything, right? Like if I'm not able to pressure your life total and get you low enough to where you have to block to stop yourself from dying, then the damage I've done up until like the 30th point of damage doesn't actually matter, because if I'm having to block and keep myself alive, then I'm never going to get a chance to actually try to threaten you and finish you off. So in that way, Counter Blessings helps you potentially take advantage of a slower matchup where you're going to get more of a buffer to set up turns against them where you can not rely on blocking with your most important cards. You can get more time to set up big plays. You can have more time to just play the game. And so, sure, if you're playing a deck that likes to block a little, attack a little, Counter Blessings is going to add up to some good value, but they are spending cards out of their deck, just like if they had played an unmovable or if they played any other blocking card. So when we think about the actual math behind these cards, because the first couple that you play are going to be terrible. They're going to be absolutely below rate as far as you could have done so much better by just blocking with some cards, right, for many, many turns. And on top of that, you're not denying on-hit effects. I think people are really underestimating the fact that there are a lot of heroes in the game that have good on-hit effects now. I think of things like New, right? Or even you can think of heroes that do well when they have the ability to get through somebody. Like, obviously, Dawnblade Dorinthia hasn't been very powerful for a long time, but there are heroes that are very happy to attack people who have 9 0 blocks in their deck, especially when they have a good weapon or they have a good long-term game plan to get value and are not just throwing cards that go straight to the graveyard, right? If you are approaching Flesh and Blood as a game where it's like, oh, I should be able to just play every card out of my deck and kill my opponent, and anything that stops me from doing that is bad design, I think that's wrong. I think that you should have an axis in the game where there are heroes that can succeed by having a value over time game plan, where they are not just burning the candle from both ends and trying to just throw every card down for the entire game. And if Counter Blessings enables that, I think that's a good thing. I feel like Counter Blessings is specifically going to be fun for Verdance because she can use that life gain with her amp very effectively. And sure, there might be some decks that struggle to deal with it, but it's not like there's not counterplay. Poison the Well was a card printed in Dusk Till Dawn, and it's a blue instant card that not only stops healing, but reverses the next instant of healing that happens on that turn. So let's say your opponent blocked out or something, and they're trying to play a Counter Blessings for 9 or 10 health or something, right? So it's pretty far into the game. It's one of their last ones that they're playing, and you've held your Poison the Well in Arsenal for a while because they're not pressuring you, right? They're playing Counter Blessings. They're not really able to do much. Well, if they activate Counter Blessings and they don't have another source of healing, that instant speed, you are not only invalidating their healing, but you're then dealing that much damage to them. So it's like quadruple value because, or, you know, it's double value, but it's not only double value because they spent 2 cards, which they're putting a lot of resources in. So, right, if they were healing 12, they were doing a 2-card 12. You are now getting a 1-card play that counters their 2-card 12 and makes it a negative 2-card 12 into them. So it's like you played a 2-card 12 that forced them to discard cards and you didn't have to. I mean, it's insane, right? Like if you Poison the Well at a late game Counter Blessings, it's an absolute blowout as far as the value swing. And so you can't forget that kind of thing. You can't forget the fact that there is counterplay in the game. And I remember there were some people that were talking about, oh, I don't want to go back to like Yu-Gi-Oh where my sideboard has to be dedicated to so many things. It's like, well, have you thought about, you know, cannibalizing slots in your main deck? Like, obviously you want to run all the super synergy high value cards in your deck because you want to be really greedy with your deck building. That's awesome and I'm happy for you, but at the end of the day, Flesh and Blood's a game where your cards actually can serve multiple purposes, and it's a completely different world than Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh or any other card game out there. One of the issues with specifically one of the examples I heard was that Mystic Mine in Yu-Gi-Oh, and you know what that is, I'm sorry, but the only counterplay to that was basically spell speed removal, and that's things like the classical Mystical Space Typhoon, right? Things like that. And even then, the Mystic Mine decks had counterplay to that. And so if you didn't have the answer to Mystic Mine, you lost the game, right? I don't think Counter Blessings is quite that bad, not even close. But even if it were that bad, you literally have a main deckable like blue card, which directly plays into and against Counter Blessings decks. So it's not like you're having to play a red action card that you have to set up and that only works for a turn. I'm referencing Chains of Eminence, by the way. Chains of Eminence was a card printed forever ago, I think Arcane Rising, and it's kind of like a censor effect. You call a card name and your opponent can't pitch or play that card. The problem with Chains of Eminence is that it lasts for 1 turn, and it's a red card that blocks 2 and does nothing else. That's terrible. That card was never good, it's never really been playable. And the reason for that is very obvious. It doesn't last long enough, you can't use it at the opportune time. You only have 1 arsenal slot, and the fact that you have to guess what's in your opponent's hand to even get value out of it at all is an incredibly high ask. Whereas Poison the Well is a blue card, which means you can just take a blue 3-block out of your deck that doesn't do anything, because let's be honest, most of the blue cards in the game don't do anything. And you can throw Poison the Well in your deck if you're really worried about your deck's matchup in Counter Blessings decks, and you can directly answer their stuff by throwing it in Arsenal and just waiting, because again, they're not going to be able to pressure you very well. So I will say that I think LSS is doing a good job of providing cards nowadays that counter specific strategies, and I wish the game had more examples where you couldn't just prep for everything in one build of the decks. This is why I'm so against whatever point of view those people were coming from that I've been hearing around in the community. It is a good thing for you to have to make deck building sacrifices to improve your matchups. That's what meaningful choice is all about. Meaningful choice is not how do I make the greediest, most optimal synergistic deck possible that does well into like 1 or 2 matchups because those are the only 2 matchups that are relevant to the game. You know, it's good that you have to have ambiguity about which cards you should put in your deck. And it's like, oh, do I put Poison Well in my deck? Can I afford to sacrifice these 3 blocks to improve my Count Your Blessings deck matchups? Or do I need my 3 blocks really bad for this other matchup and then I have to sacrifice my Count Your Blessings matchup, whatever the case may be, right? Like that's interesting deck building and that's interesting gameplay where you have to smell out or sniff out rather what your opponent's doing. Are they setting up a Count Your Blessings strategy? Are they, you know, sinking their red ones away that you just don't see? Are they not running it at all and they're just, you know, tricking you while they're setting up their own plays? I mean, obviously we're still very new into the set, and so we don't have a ton of data to say what the meta is going to look like or what's going to be optimal, but I would just really caution against people thinking that it's a bad thing that you have to put cards in your deck that do a job, right? It's perfectly fine for, and honestly, it's a good thing for you to have to hedge your bets and not have the perfect deck list. That's a good thing because if you're doing it, everyone has to do it. And if someone wants to be greedy and go for full synergy and disregard these silver bullets or, you know, tech cards that, again, don't have to go in your sideboard. A lot of them nowadays are blue cards like Warmongers or Poison the Well, or so many other cards are now blue, even Ripple Away. The list goes on. So it's not like you're having to put a red no block that only does something in one matchup. That would be a true sideboard card. A blue card is never a true sideboard card. It's always playable, at least in the resource base of your deck. So I would say what we have going is great. I'm really glad that LSS has been designing cards that incentivize you to actually put counterplay into your deck that's not inherently synergistic with what you're doing, but that's not a dead weight loss. And I'm really interested to see what happens in the meta. I really am interested in this set. I'm very excited for Verdance. My cards are coming in the mail. I'm looking for ways to get time to open boxes or play at locals and all these things. So it's very exciting. And I'm excited to build decks and see what other people come up with. A lot of heroes that have not been very strong historically have a chance to shine because of the book bans, right? We had all the tomes and the Art of Wars and all these really cool cards get banned, which, while sad in a way, because it makes you not able to play in certain strategies anymore, what you've been used to, now it's going to be hopefully better for these more mid-rangey, less explosive heroes to get those incremental advantages over time and not get blown out and have the game end right away. I don't like the argument that a defensive deck or a defensive slanted deck like a Count Your Blessings type strategy is bad for the game in a similar fashion to how bad Zen was for the game, or Release Chain, or Release Prior, or the list goes on. Because in those games, you don't get to play the game. The game's over in like 3 turns, and you have to shuffle up your deck and, you know, scoop them up or whatever. It's not enjoyable when your hand just doesn't do anything into your opponent, and the game, you don't even get a chance to even play your cards, right? Because you're blocking the whole time to just not get murdered. Whereas in a defensive game, yeah, you might have a difficult time winning because you might not have built your deck or are not playing a hero that's able to go the distance and get value over time. But whose fault is that, right? Like, that's not the designer's fault. You chose the deck, you chose the hero. I can't think of many heroes off the top of my head that only can play the greediest possible, burn through your deck as fast as possible gameplay. And nor should those decks be, by default, always good or always the best. And it's a completely different experience to be able to say, I have time to figure out a win con into this deck. Let me see what I can do. Where, again, Count Your Blessings does not net more HP than just blocking 3 every turn. So if you couldn't get through that, I'm sorry, but your deck probably wasn't that great in the first place. And, you know, maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe I'm wrong and Count Your Blessings is the most OP thing that's ever existed, but I really doubt it. There is counterplay. There are mechanics that exist in the game that allow you to directly answer what they're doing and have time to do so. You have so many things that are available as far as heroes that can put out high amounts of damage consistently, thinking like Levia. You have other decks that can play a slower game, decks that take advantage of lower block values. You have combo decks that can kill people through any number of healing sources. You know, so, like, think about Saber's Bolton. We haven't heard about him in a while. I'm sure that a Saber's Bolton or a dual-wielding Bolton deck with Lumina is perfectly capable of killing a Count Your Blessings deck while keeping them on their back foot the whole game and still charging up the combo. I feel like that's not even out of the question. So, yeah, it's a new set. We have not solved it, and there's no reason to immediately start saying, oh, this isn't what I'm used to. I loved playing Zen, or even if you didn't love playing Zen, you're thinking, oh, this isn't how I'm used to playing the game. That means that's not what the game is. It's like, no, that's not right. Flesh and Blood is a game about incremental advantages, and it's honestly a game where generally you're not supposed to just play out your hand every turn without thinking. You're supposed to think about the long game. You're supposed to have to consider, do I block with my powerful cards, my signature moves, my crippling crushes, my, you know, whatever the case may be? Or are you trying to just, you know, because that's the difference, right? If I'm just throwing my damage at my opponent and I'm not thinking about what I'm doing, not thinking about the long term, not thinking about what my win con is, if my win con in my head is just throw my cards at my opponent and hope I do the biggest number, I don't think that's what Flesh and Blood is either. I think Flesh and Blood is based on saying, hey, I have a deck, I have a certain amount of gas in that deck, how do I get myself to the win without losing, right? And obviously that's a very simplistic way to do it. I'm completely unscripted here back from work, so forgive me if I'm a bit rambly, but at the end of the day, you are trying to achieve your game plan and deny your opponent theirs, and they're trying to do the same thing to you. If your game plan is to be defensive and your opponent's not prepared for that, they don't have enough favorable trading cards in their deck, they're trying to do too much synergy, burst, high upfront value, low long-term value. They're not thinking about the deck count. They're not thinking about having enough value per card in their deck, which goes to the graveyard, then that's their fault. And I don't think that's the fault of LSS for saying, hey, we've had Zen, we've had Briar, we've had Chain, we've had Starvo, you know, these decks that just spew out value without having to really think about it. And then sometimes also have the best endgame as well. Think about Chain being able to pitch stack and set up guaranteed like endgame and getting through fatigue anyway. Briar having Sting Ball. Starvo having just incredible inevitability with Oaken Olds and being able to put stuff back in his deck and crippling crushes and everything with Dominate and the, you know, his hero power. Not to mention Zen being able to kill people through so much stuff. And obviously now we've got Dash IO coming up and she's really powerful and aggressive. So it'll remain to be seen what actually ends up happening with the game. But I'm excited. I'm very eager to play some Flesh and Blood, to throw some games around, to see what people come up with. And if an entire archetype can come up around a rare out of a set, that kind of looks like a meme. The card looks like a meme, Count Your Blessings. I say great. I say that's awesome. We need cards to build around that are not just strictly mathematically broken, like so many cards have been in the past. If Count Your Blessings is just a way to recontextualize the value of life gain or the value of the number of cards in your deck or the value of having enough damage in your deck to kill somebody if they just block, I think it's perfectly valid, especially because it doesn't block itself. It doesn't do anything proactive. It's not going to win the game on its own. It has to support other things that have not really been supported before. And I guarantee you it's beatable. So just calm down, enjoy the game. Don't worry about banning a rare out of a set the moment it's printed because you don't know what to do about it yet. Give it like months, honestly, right? Even during the peak of Zen format, where Zen was the most obnoxious deck that had been printed in the game thus far, or at least contextually in its time period, Usury still won, what, the Pro Tour, I think it was? And New was still really good, and a whole bunch of heroes were really good. And one more thing I want to address in this kind of rambly video is that it's a terrible argument to say that having to hedge your bets against more decks makes gem roulette type stuff worse. When people talk about gem roulette, they're saying that, hey, my deck doesn't have a good matchup into XYZ deck, and so if I run into them, it's like an auto loss, and that feels bad. I agree that auto losses feel bad. I think that Flesh and Blood has too many polarizing matchups in the game. I think that culprits of that are generally illusionist, so what can you do? They would just operate in a completely different axis, but at the same time, I that's a whole different video. The point is that non-games feel bad. And if your deck literally can't compete or literally can't function into certain decks and you get paired into that randomly, that sucks. But there's not really anything we can do about that at the moment, because that's how LSS has designed the game, around certain decks or certain classes and certain archetypes. That said, having the opinion or observation that having to tech your deck to be better into a wider field versus just choosing a few specific decks to target and thinking that the choice to do one of those things, it makes the game worse because you can't have like 2 decks to test into, I think is like, it's such a bad take. That's such a bad take, in my opinion. Like, as a competitor, having a super mega refined metagame to say, hey, I only want to prepare for 3 decks and maybe like 2 rogue decks that I should win anyway because my deck's better, is so boring compared to what Flesh and Blood can offer. In a lot of games, that may be true because the card games that are not Flesh and Blood are generally less well designed. Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh! These are not games that are inherently fun to play unless your enjoyment from card games comes from being a sadist and denying your opponent the ability to have fun. Generally speaking, constructed formats in card games are terrible because they have a dominant deck or a couple dominant decks that completely obliterate everything in the game. You don't have a chance to win unless you're playing the very top best decks. And then here in Flesh and Blood, you have people complaining that someone brought Teklevossen to the Worlds and then beat people and then vanished. So you're saying that, oh, Teklevossen beat my deck, and that's bad because Teklevossen sucks. And it's like, okay, well, if Teklevossen sucks, but he beat your deck, that's not something that happens in other card games. Like, in other card games, you don't have some random deck come out of nowhere and just beat a couple people and then leave and have had fun. That just doesn't happen. And the fact that Flesh and Blood has the ability to do that because there are actual matchup discrepancies in the game, and that, generally speaking, LSS is trying to design the game such that one deck is not just the best deck. Again, they mess up on that sometimes. Starvo, Briar, these heroes have always been very polarizing and very just domineering when they are strong, but they've never been absolutely unbeatable in the case of a metagame. Chain was beaten by Prism enough at the time, and again, whether that's because Chain players just weren't good enough yet to beat the average Prism player at the time is irrelevant. That's the results that happened. Briar, same thing. Lexi and Oldhim were very strong at the time. Prism was still a strong hero. Chain was still around. There was a lot of stuff happening, and then Starvo happened. Viserai and Prism were very strong, and then other heroes could win too. Chain, I believe, won the first Pro Tour when he wasn't really on many people's radar and was not the primary winner of ProQuest leading up to that event. And so on it goes. So I will just reiterate by saying that it is a good thing that people have to consider more than like 3 decks or 2 strategies of either pure aggro or pure fatigue to build their decks. You can put tech cards in your deck to make you better into certain matchups and worse into others, and that's a good thing. I do not think that we have fully fleshed out the metagame or what answers could happen to these different decks. And I think that complaining that the metagame encourages people to hedge their bets and have to choose between a greedy synergy deck build versus a teched out, hedged version of their deck that can handle multiple different things reasonably, I think that's a completely misguided take. So if you have been getting destroyed by Count Your Blessings, let me know about it in the comments down below. I would love to know how broken this card really is and how your deck specifically, whatever it is, has struggled into it. Because, again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this card is the worst thing since Drone of Brutality. Maybe this card does make Flesh and Blood the worst card game in the world. I remain to be convinced, but I'd love to be convinced. So if you have a story or an anecdote or evidence, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to see it. In the meantime, I'm going to be brewing, I'm going to be playing games, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.